Well, Dalton, if you're ready, we'll get rolling. I'll start with an introduction.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're happy that some of you can join us today for our noon webinar with Dalton Sawyer on the topic of disaster planning. Dalton is Director, Environmental Health and Safety, Business Continuity and Crisis Management at UNC Healthcare, where he oversees and leads the environment of care, emergency management, business continuity, critical incident stress management, and critical infrastructure protection programs, and facilitates system standardization activities across network affiliates. He also serves as executive sponsor for quality and performance improvement projects. He has a BS in emergency administration and management, and has also done extensive work with the U.S. Forest Service as a firefighter. Dalton shared with me that he is planning to provide, highlight his experience from earlier this week and that of the hospitals as they dealt with this water main break. So we're excited to hear this very current presentation, and Dalton, welcome.
All right, thank you, and thank you to everyone who is on the line. We really don't have this happen in Chapel Hill very often. Unfortunately, we've had it happen twice in about 2.5 years with water. Today, everybody, we are going to, and one thing, if anyone can't hear me for whatever reason, send a chat and I will pause and go back and see if I can adjust my microphone a little bit. So, slides are jumping around just a bit. Hold on.
This is a 1-hour presentation. We had a question from Bonnie about that. It is a 1-hour presentation.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second. The slides are going a little bit crazy on me.
So you can just click on the screen, Dalton, and I think it'll give you back there you go.
Okay. There we go. All right, so the objectives today is we're going to go over natural and man-made disasters and really focus on their implications for infection control. Identify the components of an emergency operations plan, as well as provide some really good reference materials that are included in your slide deck. It should be in your book as well, I believe. Correct, Amy? They're in the back, if I'm not mistaken. They have been in years past. On emergency operations planning, different resources for infection control planning as it has a nexus to emergency management. So let's get started. Why do we plan? Well, with the ever-evolving discussions regarding climate change, global warming, global cooling, I think it's obvious to everybody that the climate is changing. There's a old saying by Mark Twain: climate is what you predict, weather is what you get. And lately we've been getting some crazy weather. So without delving too far into that whole debate, here in North Carolina, we took 2 significant hits from major hurricanes, major storms. They weren't Saffir-Simpson major hurricanes. However, they were significant hurricanes for us, 2 hits inside 35 days. That's a first for us. So we're seeing unprecedented impacts, especially with urban sprawl. One of the lessons here regarding preparedness is really Sumter Regional Hospital. Sumter Regional Hospital got hit with an EF3 tornado. It was the first modern era hospital that we have documented being hit by a tornado. This happened back in February, not what we typically think is tornado weather, in 2007. About 55 patients were in the hospital, and there were no deaths. There was 1 RN that broke a finger, and that's because they got caught in a door, something totally not even related to the storm. Big emphasis here is the foot stomp is no patients died during this, and they didn't die because of the attention paid by Sumter and its leadership and its employees to emergency preparedness. Katrina, we've all heard the horror stories and seen the videos of Katrina and what a lack of preparedness can do, as well as what happens when a major storm impacts an urban area. Some of the lessons we learned from Katrina, just from a strictly epidemiological stance, can be seen on the board or on the screen in front of you. This shouldn't come as a huge surprise if you really look at what you would associate with flooding, breakdown in public utilities. This is about what you'd expect. One of the big things we saw, I think it was on the previous screen. Nope. Norovirus, salmonella. Okay, the fourth bullet down, TB. I was working in Arkansas at the time, and one of the things we really grappled with in Arkansas was state of Louisiana had a decent handle on the people they had with TB. However, when they evacuated, they pretty much scattered to the wind. And that was a difficulty for public health tracking these people, especially ones with XDR-TB. So this was especially interesting, and it's something we've continued to track with all the hurricanes. We had an exercise in this with the shelter here in Chapel Hill with a cluster of persons who were on TB preventive medication and one person who had active TB. It wasn't known until they started doing the history. So even for areas not directly impacted by the landfall, it can have a significant, it'll significantly increase your workload as epidemiologists and infection control professionals, simply tracking down the people that weren't previously in your community that have diseases that need surveillance like TB, C. difficile, and things like that. Major declarations, this slide needs to be updated because we could probably fill this screen just in the last 13 years. But North Carolina is one of the leading states for major disaster declarations. We are frequently hit, and we're frequently hit by a variety and a diversity of storms, everything from ice storms to tropical weather, on occasion even severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, and flooding. Droughts. We're an agricultural state, so we've actually received disaster declarations because of that as well. Hurricane Ivan, once again, these are very dated. Substitute out the name. This could be Lumberton, this could be Fayetteville, this could be parts of Chapel Hill. We receive extensive inland flooding, 2.1 million persons. I just heard on the news that Hurricane Florence has now reached, the damages from Hurricane Florence here in North Carolina have reached over $1 billion. That's with a B, billion with a B. So any storm that hits west of or east of New Orleans, in all likelihood, will in some way, form, or fashion impact North Carolina and, for the most part, the Mid-Atlantic. I'm not sure where everyone is from in the class. Do me a favor, actually, those of you on the line, just send a message to me, just letting me know where everyone is in the class. That way I can kind of gauge the audience. I appreciate that. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Some of the major, and once again, wipe out the name here and start looking at just the cause of death. It doesn't matter what hurricane this is. These are pretty much the standard ones you're going to see across the board. Drowning overwhelmingly, and principally freshwater drowning, is the #1 cause of death in hurricanes, without a doubt. One of the other interesting pieces that does, and these shouldn't be hugely surprising from an epidemiological standpoint of what you start to see increases in: dermatitis, insect bites, fevers of unknown origin. Dog bites surprise a little people a lot of times. Sometimes an animal that's normally domesticated and docile, when it's put in a stressful situation just like we are, reacts differently. Suicide attempts made one of the largest jumps across the board, and that is owed largely to the fact that most homeowners insurance policies do not actually cover floods. So that is a major issue that we have to contend with. Why do we plan? Seeing how most people are from the Mid-Atlantic Carolinas area, it's, once again, sub out North Carolina, but it's our obligation to the people in the communities we serve in the Carolinas and the United States. Regulatory agencies mandate it. We all know this, and we're getting even more mandates and more regulations surrounding emergency management, public health preparedness. And the biggest thing is there really is no easy button for disasters or emergencies. There is no reset. You can't hit pause. You can't come back and do this another day if things aren't to your liking. I chat sometimes with my colleagues throughout healthcare, maybe in the surgical arena or something like that, and they tell me, well, we couldn't do this procedure on this day, so we waited till the patient stabilized just a little bit, and then we did it the next day. We don't really have that luxury in emergency management. We're dealt a situation, and we can't wait to address that situation until it's warmer outside or until we have more staff. We pretty much have to roll with what we have. Emergency management plans, this is the basic planning cycle for emergency management. This is not a linear process, it's a circular. And you'll see some people that will put out the planning P, which has like 16 steps. I choose to think of it like this. You prepare, that includes planning. You respond, recovery, which includes fixing what was broken, but also doing your after action, but also mitigation. Mitigation is kind of the linchpin on this. If you have a window that always blows out, or a electrical switch panel that always fails, why do you keep repairing it to the same standard? Maybe you need to repair it to a greater standard, or maybe you need to move it to a safer location. That's what mitigation is. Mitigation could be replacing a 500 kilowatt generator with a 1,000 or 1,000 kilowatt generator. That's what we're talking about mitigation, facility hardening. The planning cycle, identifying your risks. For those of you who have operational risk management training, this should look very, very familiar. You have to know what you're planning against before you can actually execute a plan. Develop mitigation strategies, exercise your plan, and then revise the plan as needed. And this is a cyclical process. It doesn't start and end. A lot of projects have a start date and an end date. Emergency management is cyclical. That doesn't mean we can't use Six Sigma and some of the other performance improvement methodologies to solve a single point, but we just have to understand that that's solving for one causation. The whole process has to continue to go. So once we fix that one causation of an issue, that's fine. But that issue resolved is now part of that overall process. So it never starts, it never ends. Really, the purpose is to establish of emergency planning across the board. Doesn't matter whether you're in a financial institution, a hospital, or a municipality. You want to present a flexible or establish a flexible all hazards approach to response and recovery that can reach across disciplines. In other words, it's just as applicable to the CEO as it is to the volunteer working in a gift shop. It should be able to be understood across all the full spectrum of all the skill sets within an institution. And one of its core goals should be, we're all going to do things this way in the event of emergency. It's called a common operating picture. You set that expectation and you exercise, you train to that expectation. And then once an emergency happens, then that's how you're actually going to execute. In the Navy and the military, we have a term called you train like you fight. You simulate as close to possible the conditions of an emergency when you do your training, when you do your exercising, and that will really glean some really positive things when you're actually faced with a disaster. And of course, anything that's planning related should not be on an island. Obviously, you want to be resilient, but you want to be sure that your plan integrates well with colleagues across maybe competitors or sister institutions within an organization, and even just within your community as a whole. There are two types of planning in my book: regulation-based planning and functional planning. Regulation-based planning, these are plans that we have to have by law. We have to have plans that are built on an HVA, that have hazard vulnerability analysis, that incorporate performance improvement type items. That's just mandated. We have to test the plan. Hazard-based planning takes that framework and says, okay, this is what we're going to actually do. Our plan is going to be based on an objective hazard vulnerability analysis, not the flavor of the month disaster, but what is actually most likely to impact us. What I mean by that is, if an earthquake happens, it's in the news, everyone wants an earthquake plan. I'm not saying you shouldn't have one, but really take a good look and say, is it indicated by our hazard vulnerability analysis? What is the frequency that we have them? Historically, when we have had them, how significant are the damages? You always want to try to be proactive in this instead of reactive. You don't want to be sitting there writing a plan for a tornado when you have a tornado warning issued for you. That's where this hazard vulnerability analysis really comes into play. Like I said, the hazard vulnerability analysis, it's just like a plan, cannot be done on an island. It's community input is essential. You have to know what the community resources are. Basically, this analysis is a matrix. Most of them incorporate a couple things. What's the frequency? What's the impact? And what are your mitigation strategies that you've done to harden against those? Here's an example of one that the Kaiser Family Foundation put out. It's basically a glorified Excel spreadsheet, and it puts out really nice, pretty graphs. I like nice, pretty graphs because my CFO likes really nice, pretty graphs, doesn't like a lot of words. So if my boss is happy, then I'm happy. But it's good because it does put things in an objective form. Each one of these, we went through the exercise of actually laying out all these, the columns underscore. Whoop, sorry, hold on. The columns underscore, we actually went and said, okay, what does 1 mean? What does 2 mean? What does 3 mean? We did do one thing. We took out non-applicable. If a disaster isn't applicable, we just removed it from the template. Like, for example, volcanoes. Not a lot of volcanic activity in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, or Columbia, South Carolina, or Greensboro, or Asheville, or Charlotte. Unless you guys know something I don't know, I'm not really worried about a volcano sprouting up, knock on wood, underneath the campus at UNC Chapel Hill, nor would I be if I was anywhere else in the Carolinas. Yes, I know I've heard that Clingman's Dome is technically a dormant volcano, but it's been dormant for centuries. So for those of you who don't know what Clingman's Dome is, it's a volcano out in the western part of North Carolina. So common hazards and associated risks considerations. Earthquakes typically will happen. We're going to go through some of these disasters pretty quick and hit on the ones that are most pertinent to you as ICPs. Earthquakes have relatively little warning, but can have significant impact on infrastructure. If you look at the environment as a resource, you can really be innovative. If you are having difficulty getting certain supplies, think outside the box. A lot of people don't realize this, but there aren't a lot of manufacturers that make certain types of medical equipment, and veterinary offices oftentimes have FDA compliant equipment. This is something that's been used before with regards to things like IV tubing or things of that nature, where you will actually have clinics and hospitals soliciting assistance, and some of the resources they get, it's the same type of IV tubing you would buy in a hospital. It just happened to be stocked at a vet's office. Still FDA compliant, Medicare, Medicaid, all that good stuff. They use the same thing. Why would you design something separately if you didn't need to? So look at your environment as a resource. If you're ever driving through Memphis, Tennessee, north of Memphis, you'll notice the bridges have they look like anchor chains on them. That's in the event that the bridge were to break, it catches the bridge at just the right height so semis can go underneath it. They've also looked at building roads over instead of under or across. So some of the biggest things are transportation will be impacted. Sewer and utility function will be significantly impacted. Safe water will be harder to come by. Dust, principally aspergillus, will be an issue. I will tell you this, in a regional disaster, losing water can be absolutely catastrophic to a region. What we just went through here in Chapel Hill, we were very fortunate. This was isolated to us. In other words, there were no other major medical centers that we were having to compete against to get temporary toilets, water, portable suction units, all the things that we lost. We did not have to compete. If this had been a major regional disaster, it would have been very difficult for us to get the resources that we needed, even with our advanced plans. Floods are somewhat similar to earthquakes as far as impacts go. You may or may not have a flood warning. You may or may not realize the extent of the flood. Michael and Florence and Matthew took a lot of people by surprise, not necessarily that it flooded, but where it flooded and how it flooded. Roads that have a history of flooding need to be evaluated into your plans. If your typical cargo routes go across an area that frequently floods, it may be time to think about different routes for people to come and go to the institution, as well as supplies. When it comes to actual flooding inside of your building, it can take 48 to 72 hours to get construction material dry, and that's assuming it's immediately start the drying process. Even once it's dry, may not be salvageable. It may need to be ripped out, and that depends largely on the quality of the water and the relative humidity outside. Engage with your industrial hygienists and your plant engineers, your rehabilitation contractor services, remediation contracting services, probably the better term. They can bring in moisture meters to really assess the extent of damage. It's important to remember that the damage doesn't stop at the water level. Oftentimes it extends beyond that. Hurricanes. I told my team the other day I don't want to hear the word hurricane until next hurricane season, and I still mean that. This was a rough hurricane season for us in the Carolinas. It really, really was. We took a beating. Unfortunately, we had pretty significant losses of life too. Significant impacts in infrastructure. We've all seen this, especially those of you out. I saw one person here from New Bern. You guys had an especially rough go this hurricane season. Any of you down in the southeastern part of North Carolina, you saw firsthand what the extent of damage can be from hurricanes. Protection of supplies and supply routes, like I mentioned with floods, is absolutely essential. Prolonged power outages. We're not talking days, we're talking weeks in some cases. Water quality can be compromised, not necessarily because a water treatment plant or a water distribution plant is out, but if your water treatment plant is out, that can be just as bad. Our biggest vulnerability here in Chapel Hill is the location of our water treatment plant. That's what worries us the most. Wildland fire, not necessarily as huge of a risk from an infection control standpoint, but really from an air quality standpoint, and that's for patients who are already immunocompromised. Anything environmental, as you guys know, can cause the patients to decompensate more often or at a greater rate. Tornadoes, pretty self-explanatory. We're talking about absolutely devastating winds. Utility disruptions, typically not as bad for water disruptions unless the actual storm, the tornado, hits a water treatment plant. But we're mainly talking about energy disruptions, which from this, depending on the nature of your facility, may also include HVAC disruptions. What happens if you lose your cooling towers? Does that mean you can't hold positive or negative pressure? What are the implications for that? So just be sure that you understand that these type of hazards and what these hazards can bring, i.e. power outages, and look at your own institution. If you lose your cooling towers, what does that mean for air handling units? Does that impact your ability to hold positive or negative pressure? What about humidity? What are the impacts to sterile storage? Things of that nature. That's what we're really looking at from that point of view. Emerging infectious diseases and terrorism. This, we lean on you guys more than any other particular hazard set with a higher degree of ignorance on our part as emergency managers. You guys are the experts when it comes to infectious disease and epidemiological surveillance. It may or may not come without warning. Someone launches a bioterrorism attack during flu season and people start showing up with flu-like symptoms to the ED. You see how they could get lost in the shuffle. We may not be able to identify patient 0 nearly quick enough. Recognition of suspect cases, symptomologies that appear off cycle. If we're having a large number of flu-like symptoms occur when we just are not seeing in the atmosphere or in the environment flu, that could be an issue. Food poisoning. I've always been fascinated with the work that epidemiologists do when they trace back and can trace back to a particular lot number of lettuce that was processed at this factory and served in this restaurant and transported via this truck. It's absolutely fascinating. But food poisoning, it takes a long time to run some of those things down. The Rajneeshi cult up in, I believe it was up in Pacific Northwest, either Washington or Oregon, actually conducted a bioterrorism attack on the Dales County up there with the intent of making so many people in the county sick that their own cult population could take over the county council. And they very nearly succeeded, Had one person not been caught, they would have actually been able to influence the outcome of a local election, a county level election, through the use of a bioterrorism agent. They basically cultured salmonella and sprayed it on a salad bar. So this is a significant problem. We really went into this earlier. If you lose power, you also have the potential to lose a variety of different hazard or life safety pieces of equipment. Generators are key, but in an emergency power infrastructure, you need to understand it's not simply the generator. Almost the more important part is the automatic switchgear. The automatic switchgear cues the generator to come over. It also directs the energy to the circuits you want. HVAC are your air handlers and cooling towers. Are they powered by your air conditioning or by your generators? I will tell you this: air conditioning units are not priority 1 on the life safety code. They are a priority, but they are not priority 1. In other words, for automated point of energy management systems, they oftentimes are one of the first things to be shed, as well as sterilizers. Are your sterilizers, your steam sterilizers, equipment you use for high level disinfection, is all of that. It's all of that powered on your emergency generators. Or if it isn't, is that a known and you know and you plan around that? All right, we're going to breeze through this pretty quick. This is all pretty self-explanatory, and it's in your book. And this isn't necessarily something you would need for any kind of board or a test. This is just more good resources you can have. SLG, I think it's the CLG 101 now. I'll have to double check. But if you Google Emergency Operations Plan and FEMA, you'll find a variety of different resources, and there's some really, really good ones out there. Your basic plan is going to be identified by a couple of key features regardless of what you do, what template you use. Your scope, your authorities, planning assumptions. In other words, what are we planning against? How do you activate and deactivate your plan, so your bookends, and then what do you do between those two bookends? We really refer to that as a concept of operations. It's not a policy because disasters exist outside the normal realm of policy. If it could be managed by a very prescriptive methodology, it would be. Unfortunately, disasters can't, so that's why we have concepts, procedures, recommendations, not hard, fast policies in a lot of places. Functional annexes, we choose to do those for non-disaster specific things like incident management, communication, surveillance, utility management. In other words, it's things you have to have in place that are somewhat independent of actual scenarios. For scenario-specific things, you can have appendices such as a tornado plan, a active shooter plan, a mass casualty plan, and a bioterrorism plan, but they all lean back on those functional areas like incident management, communication, utility management, resource management, so on and so forth. I've got my friend Gumby over here. Plans need to be flexible. Every plan should bend but not break. That's what you really want to go for when it comes to emergency management planning. Scalability, you don't want to have it be a go or no go. It should build up and then build right back down. This will help tremendously with incident management and return to normal operations. Incident command system is what most plans in the United States are built off of. If you're receiving federal preparedness funds, you must be a NIMS compliant, have a NIMS compliant plan. This is hospital incident command system. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Many of you have had this, I'm sure, previously. Incident command starts with one person in command, and ideally you don't want any more than three to seven people reporting to any one person. Now, obviously, the incident commander could have 100 or 1,000 people reporting indirectly, but you want to try to spread that out so no one in this structure has 25 people all asking them a question at the same time. It provides consistent terminology. If you use ICS, you can pluck somebody from, for example, we very nearly had to pull people in from Wake Med and Duke to come to UNC because we needed so much assistance during this last event. It is manageable. It helps you manage a span of control. That's what we're talking about by divvying out the work, having 3 to 7 people per person in the structure. It also it's integrated at the national level. Okay, some of your priorities as an infection control professional when it comes to disaster management are principally around communication, surveillance and knowledge base on communicable diseases. You guys would be what we call medical technical specialists within our emergency management, incident management structure. Assisting with resource management, resource allocation, you know better than anyone else where is it most important to have hand washing sinks that are portable with soap and water versus alcohol-based food rubs. If we have to make risk-based decisions on something involving infection control that departs from our normal operating procedure, what poses the least amount of risk? What has the least amount of risk if we have to depart and go to altered standards of care? Communication is absolutely key. Communicating early and often. That's something we struggled a little bit with during this event, and I'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. Communication is absolutely key. Always keep a log of what you did, when you did it, and who you communicated to. That way you can go back and assist your emergency management team with, okay, we issued this order at this time, this guidance at this time. We told these people, and we told them via this. It didn't work well. Okay, well, let's try this mode of communication next time. Surveillance. You guys are the experts on surveillance. You know what we're looking for here. The biggest piece about surveillance is a form of information collection. The best way to combat rumors is with certifiable, good, competent information. Communicable diseases. We have certain diseases inside the hospital that we can try to put a clamp down on, such as food and waterborne diseases, any kind of diseases that are passed via fecal matter or stool, things like that. Major outbreaks of infectious diseases are relatively rare because we have such good controls. However, when we're talking about something where you have a major disruption of utilities, that's when the environment is more ripe for a communicable disease type issue. Oh, patient management. Be ready for a surge and be ready for patients to be taken care of in areas where you may not typically have patients. This isn't necessarily just centric to an epidemiological or infectious disease-based disaster. If we have a mass casualty event here at UNC, one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to potentially be caring for patients in areas that don't typically see patients. In other words, instead of having nice tile floors that are easy to clean, they may have carpet, or the walls may not be the same material that we're typically used to seeing in an inpatient environment. We may use those areas for discharge lounges, any number of things. So be flexible in your approach when it comes to this. Quarantine, if you have an incident, an emergency where all of a sudden someone needs to be put into quarantine, communicate that with your local authorities and understand who has the authority in your particular jurisdiction to issue a quarantine order. If you're in Orange County, I can tell you who that is. That is your public health director. Public health director in North Carolina actually has an incredible amount of power. But for those of you who are out of state, do some research and find out who has quarantine authority in your particular jurisdiction. And if you're unclear, reach out to your state Department of Public Health. Like we mentioned, our alternate care facilities. What about mortality? This is something that no one really wants to talk about, but one of the major issues we were faced with during Hurricanes Florence and Michael was the overcapacity or the PEDS capacity of fatality management systems. Most of our affiliate hospitals down east reached or exceeded their morgue capacity. We actually had to deploy mobile mortuary units down to the coast to help manage the number of fatalities. And it wasn't necessarily all related to the hurricane. A lot of us were related to the nationwide issue that we're having in this country right now surrounding opioids. The opioid crisis has created a second order effect that a lot of people aren't tracking, and that is the saturation of mortuary capacity and morgue capacity. It really has created a significant issue, especially for smaller rural hospitals, and especially with those hospitals that are in areas that are being the hardest hit by the opioid crisis. So that's something to keep in mind. Resource management. One of the things I really want to hit here is the very bottom one. Consider high-level disinfection in place of sterilization. I am not going to sit here and tell you when that's appropriate. That has to be a risk-based decision that you have with your expertise, your clinicians, and your risk management. In a disaster, just about everything and anything is on the table for solutions, but you have to have these discussions in a structured manner, and your emergency plan should spell out, if we're going to do this, who has to be consulted and who has the ultimate authority to do it. That's very, very important. We're very fortunate in our emergency operations plans. We've addressed these over the years, and we do it as a group. So we have infection control weigh in. We have other people weigh in if we have to go down roads such as this about altering standard practice for hand hygiene, so to speak. Transportation loss. In this country, most things come in, including people, come in via POV. Unless you're in an urban area where everyone uses mass transit, that's the way it's going to be. And even then, I was just watching a documentary last night on the Boston Marathon bombing. When Boston went to shelter in place, they went to full shelter in place, which meant mass transit wasn't running. Supply trucks weren't running. Special considerations had to be made just to get staff in, stuff in, but then also staff out, patients out, and stuff out. If you want to see a big mess, wait till you can't pick up your trash for 3 days. Most people do just-in-time trash delivery and takeaway. Miss 3 deliveries or 3 pickups from your sanitation department, and you will have a significant issue, a significant health and safety issue. So transportation loss can have huge impact. Decontamination, this can be anything from physical, chemical, or environmental. I will tell you, decontamination is always centered around life safety first, the environment second, and the building last. I don't care what the concerns may be about a piece of equipment. We will always decontaminate people and patients and staff first, followed by the environment, because that's more irreplaceable. That's almost as irreplaceable. And then a building. If we have to rebuild an ED, we can do that. We cannot drop a little capsule in a bucket of water and get a doctor, a nurse, and an NA. That can't happen. We cannot allow an area to turn into a Superfund site where we just can't build it all. Okay, water. Oh boy. I was at the Friday Center this past week. Showed up early, was going to catch up on some emails, listening on some of the rest of your conversations. As I was pulling in, I received a frantic call from Campus Emergency Management Coordinator saying that we had lost 70% of the capacity in the OWASA system. OWASA is our water provider. He said there was no emergent concern, because that's what he was told. And all of a sudden I had flashbacks to about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago in February on a Friday when we almost had the same thing happen and we had a boil water order issued. Some of the things that you need water for in healthcare, and we have learned this lesson the hard way. Everything you see on the screen in front of you is absolutely true. Sterilization, processing of scopes. I will tell you this, sometimes water can come from multiple sources. Sometimes it comes from normal potable water sources. Sometimes it comes from reclaimed water. For example, oftentimes chiller towers, steam sterilizers come from where steam plants use reclaimed water. I will tell you something else that is not on this list, and that is suction. We lost suction, walled suction. What that meant was we could not do surgeries. We had significant challenges caring for patients in an ICU setting. It also meant we had to go on a diversion style operation in our ED. We could not take patients from the outside. Losing suction was one of the things that had one of the most catastrophic impacts to us. We got around it by using portable suction units. We brought in over 75 portable suction units from all over the state. All of our affiliates, all of our other hospitals in the region, including Duke. There is a truck still parked in our loading dock with a big Duke emblem on the side of it. Without even us being asked, they immediately dispatched a truck without them being even asked. They dispatched a truck with purification units and suction units to a staging area and sent a text saying, "Hey, the keys are under the visor. It's yours for as long as you need it." Which was we have a very good relationship with them in emergency management. That was a really heartwarming thing for us to see. It really, really was. Wake Forest sent over a trailer with portable bathrooms inside it. Once again, it was here within 4 hours. They pulled people out of meetings, doing other things, dealing with their own situations to assist us. We had a university in the UNC system that offered to give us 1,000 gallons worth of 5-gallon jugs. We had letters, we had calls of support, offers of ambulances, personnel from Wake Med and just about every other hospital you could think of. So if you are from one of the hospitals I just listed, there were too many to list. Please accept our sincere thanks. It was heartwarming to know. So some of the issues we faced: dialysis. Some machines can run off of non-potable water, some can't. Understand if yours can. Suction. Like I said, if you don't have water pressure, your suction pumps can't run. Here is another thing that you can't do if you don't have water. And to be clear, this wasn't a boil water order for us, just we lost water pressure. We had to shut down all of our transfer and booster pumps, including our fire pumps. We had to institute a roving fire watch, fire patrol across our institution until we could get the fire department and jurisdictions from across the triangle to pump water back into our buildings so we had a functional fire alarm system. 25 gallons per patient, that's not an exaggeration. That's about how much water we were using. That is not an exaggeration whatsoever. State, federal agencies can provide potable water and water purification systems and power generators. I will tell you, try to get your own contracts first. We're very fortunate we had standing POs with several companies, purchase orders, so we could fire them off just right immediately. For us, like I said, the biggest issues that we had were loss of suction, the implications that had to patient care, differing types of toilets and hoppers. When you lose water pressure in your house, when you lose water pressure in your house, all you really need is about a gallon of water to drop in the toilet, you flush it, and it goes bye-bye. A lot of hospitals now have high efficiency toilets where you have to have a constant water pressure to flush. That was a pretty substantial issue for us, and it wasn't one we were able to address as quick as I would have liked. I will tell you that I am now the proud owner of 200 pounds of kitty litter, 205-gallon buckets, about 200 gallons of bleach, and about 100 little scoops for kitty litter. No idea what we're going to do with it now, but we were making plans to have disaster toilets. Some of your external sources for water, hit up your local brewers. I know most of you have a brewery in your general location. That's not just a good place to go after work. If they can do growlers, they can also switch over and drop potable water in cans, including here in Chapel Hill. Also, find out which ones are in your neighboring jurisdictions are filling growlers. I cannot thank the local brewers enough this time around. Once again, they stepped up and they put out word through Facebook, Instagram, and everything else, all their other social media things, that if you brought in clean milk jugs or growlers, they would fill them with water for free. So think outside the box when it comes to water sources. Purification. Boil for 5 to 10 minutes, add about 10 drops of bleach per gallon, mix thoroughly, allow this to stand for 30 minutes before using. Once it's purified, water can be used for 24 hours. Fortunately, we did not have to get down to this level, but that's why we had bleach on hand. Assess tap water immediately. Do not, unless you are told to, do not shut off water to your institution. If you get put under a boil water order, keep the water cycling through. Boil water orders can be issued, as was our case, for a variety of reasons. Boil water was issued for us because our pressure dropped to a point where our utility could no longer guarantee that we had potable water, not because they had bad samples. By allowing water to continue to course through our building, we did not have to flush our valves. In other words, we kept water flowing through as much as we possibly could. Then once the water built up, it flushed everything out. If you isolate your building and let it run dry, you can have significant issues. One of the reasons why we have so many water main breaks or water line breaks when you lose water, you have a damaged pipe that's somewhat being held together by a constant pressure. When that pressure dramatically drops, it can actually create a suction and suck the pipe in, and then when the water pressure expands, it can create another air pressure pocket, and oftentimes it's the air pressure moving through, not the actual water, that can actually cause a water pipe to blow. Always obtain clearance for using water again through the authority having jurisdiction. Is that your utility, or is it your public health or your public health department? Communicate if you have the ability to do certain things with water to make it safe to use. That way you can keep things such as food, nutrition, nourishment stations open. Hand washing, huge. Understand what you have to be able to do with hand washing. What can you use alcohol-based rubs for? What can you use waterless treatments? What absolutely has to be with soap and water. For us, our epidemiology department did a real quick query of our medical record and isolated every single floor in which we had enteric precaution patients in. Those were the floors we sent our temporary hand washing sinks to. Once we satisfied those, we started pushing into our other high-risk areas, such as procedural areas, ORs, the ED, things like that. But that's where epidemiology and infection control professionals have a huge, huge impact to play. Hand washing stations, you can use a coffee urn to help control the flow of water. I will tell you this: individual bottles of water make really lousy vessels for hand washing. Gallon jugs are better because you don't waste as much water. 5-gallon jugs, unless you have a spigot on them, are really, really bad to use as well. Although I will tell you this, some of our units came up with an ingenious plan 2 years ago. They pulled portable suction units into the department and used portable suction units to siphon water out of 5-gallon jugs. Do not try to tip over 5-gallon jugs and wash your hands with them, because that will only result in waste. So, food, once again, the big foot stomp area on food, and this is a real foot stomp because I have heard through the grapevine you may see this again. 45 degrees to 140 degrees is the danger zone for food. If it's held in that danger zone for 4 hours, it must be discarded. That is the optimal zone for the growth of bacteria. It also is just shy of the threshold that it takes to actually cook or kill the bacteria out. I was just having this conversation with someone the other day about barbecuing and how people are trying to push the envelope lower and lower all the time on food, because apparently rare food is the thing to do now. And I love a good medium rare steak as much as the next person, but I want it up to about 135, 140 before I eat it. So, and also remember, what we do at home is not necessarily okay to do for individuals with a potential immunocompromised situation. We touched on this already. If there's a transportation issue, trash may be, the pickup of trash may be disrupted. Assess what you can do to alleviate that. Possibly using multiple use of some items, possibly dumping trash into larger bags so you don't have to empty trash bags as often. Chemical toilets, all of the above. I will tell you this: I highly discourage the use of porta potties internal to your institution. I highly discourage the use of porta potties internal to your institution. If you have loading docks, that's fine. If you have a large warehouse attached, that's a little bit better. I know of one institution that decided they were going to put porta potties in the lobby, and that was an unmitigated disaster, because you have to pump those porta potties out, and in the process of pumping out the porta potty or the porta john or portable toilet, the hose sprung a leak. So be very mindful about where you put them. Also, to be very mindful of the weather conditions. Porta johns will tip over. They will tip over in wind. You do not want to be, and I've never experienced this, but I can say with full certainty that in a tipped over porta john is not somewhere where anyone really needs to be, infection control or not. Intact sewers, if we lose sewer, that has the ability to impact us unlike other things. I will tell you, our highest ranked, even before this event happened, our highest ranked disaster was water sewer failure on our HVA. We lumped them in together. And it was the highest ranked disaster because that had the greatest impact on patient care. It also had the highest likelihood of us having to evacuate. So be very mindful of that. Have the little plastic urinals handy if that's an option. Kitty litter is always good. It can help turn liquids into solids and make them easier to manage. It can also help by creating a vessel, an absorbent vessel for biologicals, potentially infectious material to be put in. I've heard of some hospitals doing that and then dumping bleach in the buckets. So understand that this is not a comfort issue. This is more of a we're going to do what we have to do to get through this emergency. Once again, plastic gallons inside of drums. If you cannot effectively manage your sewage system, then you cannot effectively manage a safe patient care environment. If you have raw sewage flowing down the hallways, I know no one wants to evacuate, but that's no longer a safe environment for patient care or even for humans to inhabit. Some of the biggest impacts and the biggest advantages are obvious when it comes to emergency management. It eliminates duplication of effort. It's easier to transform from one operation to another, and it does have a cost mitigating aspect to it. We are never going to be a revenue generating department. It's very much like infection control. Infection control very seldom actually generates revenue in the same way that the OR does. However, emergency management, infection control, safety, occupational health can have significant cost mitigation impacts. It's also great for team building. There are lessons you learn in a disaster that can actually make your day-to-day process better. An emergency is also not the place where you want to be exchanging business cards. You need to have those relationships in place before you actually have an emergency. Reputation management. You want to have a calm, cohesive transition for normal operations, cohesive transition from normal operations into crisis operations, as calm as it can possibly be. I will tell you that this event that hit us on Monday hit us relatively quickly. I saw the direction it was going. When I was talking with Amy, Amy Powell, I was like, this could potentially get really bad. I had no idea how bad it was going to get and how quickly it was going to get that bad. Consequences of not planning, negligence, legal issues, monetary losses from settlements, damages to reputation. And the biggest thing here, the consequence of not planning, reputation management, yes, that's important. No one wants to be the hospital that does something bad. But let me just stop right here and tell you, the biggest consequence of not planning is there exists a potential that by not planning, by having that negligent approach, we could cause harm. We all got in healthcare, and one of the core tenets of healthcare is what? Do no harm. We should be doing everything we can to do no harm and to protect from harm. Our emergency management team here at UNC has a slogan: when you enter into this institution, you're family, and we will treat you as such, and we will do whatever it takes to protect you. That guides our response to everything that we do here. We treat everyone that walks in as family. We go to the ends of the earth, just like we would for our own family, to be sure that they are taken care of. And that is how we keep ourselves in check when it comes to our priorities. If it's something that we would be willing to do for our family, it's something we're willing to do for our patients and our staff. Okay. Preparation is absolutely essential when it comes to emergency management. Understanding where your vulnerabilities are. It's okay to have vulnerabilities. We all have vulnerabilities. No one's infallible. This particular water event hit us in a spot that defeated all of our redundancies. Yes, we have 4 feeds feeding the hospital, but eventually all the water has to leave the tank at the water plant through one pipe, and that one pipe broke. Collaborate with your community. You're going to meet some fascinating people, some just highly intelligent people. You're also going to meet some of the best people that we have to offer as society. People who come into emergency management, public health preparedness, epidemiology, give of themselves to protect others. And that is an attribute that we see less and less of, it seems like, in society around the world today. And those are people that I've stayed in this role, in this field, because those are people I choose to want to be around and I want to associate myself with. That includes every one of you on this call. Communicate timely, communicate accurate information, educate and exercise. Those are the biggest things I really want you to take away from this. I'm not going to go over all these resources. These are in your book, but some of these are fantastic resources. My information was on the front slide. If you have questions, feel free to email me, and I'll direct you to someone from me or my team. So with that, Amy, I can open it up to some questions.
All right.
I think the chats were all just responding to the early question of where folks are from.
They are. See, Charlotte. Oh, Oregon. Wow. Nancy from Oregon. Okay. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? It can be about the presentation, or it can be about what we just went through here with the water failure. If I can answer it, I will. I mean, we've been very forthcoming about what happened and what we had to do.
Yeah. Dalton, do you have like 3 takeaways from, learnings from this week that you could share with everybody? 2 or 3?
I do. So regarding water, have pre-canned messages, pre-scripted messages that can be sent out through your notification system almost immediately with what to do for a boil water order or for water loss. And that's really what we're looking at there. Pretty much do not use boil water and a complete loss. That's the one thing that we kind of had to go back because we didn't save the message. We had to reinvent, and it took us a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Have immediate actions for key departments when you lose water completely and for when you get put under a do not use / boil water order. One of the things that we struggled with internally, and this is going to sound really trivial, ice machines. We didn't think to disconnect and turn off our ice machines as soon as we went under a boil water order. As a result, when it was lifted, we had to drain, clean, and sanitize all the ice machines. And we're still working on it. It took 36 hours to do. So having pre-scripted action items, that includes if we're put under a boil water order, we know it'll be 24 hours before it's lifted. So we have a standing order set now. As soon as that's issued, purchasing automatically orders water and is delivered to the dock. The third one is when you set up a command center structure, try to avoid the good old boy network of communication. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of people in this institution that we've worked with. And when I say we, I mean my emergency management team that we worked with over the years. They felt they could get quicker answers by reaching out to us versus their chain of command. Really emphasize the importance of information going to leadership, coming down, and then feedback coming up. Don't circumvent that. Between myself and my emergency preparedness coordinator and other members of our team, we received over 120 cell phone calls and text messages on Monday alone between 10 o'clock and 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. that evening. It was to the point where at one point my phone died and I just could not turn it back on because I absolutely had certain action items I had to do. So managing communication was something that we really have to work on.
That's really, really helpful to folks who are hearing this and can, make sure that those takeaways are in place in their facilities. So that's very much appreciated, Dalton.
One last thing, really quick, if I may, Amy.
Yeah, sure.
Losing water, not boil water, but losing water is an existential threat to healthcare. To a healthcare facility, losing water, I'm going to say it again, that's an existential threat to a healthcare facility. You cannot do safe patient care because you cannot do hand hygiene. You also have a building that is severely degraded from a fire protection standpoint.
Yeah.
Your sprinklers won't function. If there is a fire, then not only will your sprinklers not function, it's very unlikely the fire department will be able to get water to you. So you have to have a contingency to try to eliminate as much of that gap as you possibly can. Water and sewer, it may not be the most glamorous disaster out there, but it is the thing that will cripple healthcare facility faster than any other single hazard.
Well, Dalton, thank you very much. It's timely and I'm sure heartfelt from your standpoint after this week. Let me just go to the final slide, just inviting our attendees to document your attendance. At the conclusion of the webinar, if you'll go to the web page we've been going to all week, at the very end of that page, you will see an opportunity to complete the attestation that you actually attended the entire webinar today, and then I'll have that information for my records. So thank you everyone for attending. Dalton, thank you so much for stopping what I'm sure is an ongoing cleanup and putting things back in order process to spend time with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I would not wish this on anybody else, and anything that we learn, we're going to try to publish loud and wide, so
Great.
no one else will hopefully go through this.
We will put it out. We'd love to receive that and share it with our SPICE colleagues. Thanks a lot.
Right. Thank
Thanks
you
so
for
much.
continued partnership. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.